Some of our apologies. First of all, we've got Councillor Chris Darby for absence on council business, Councillor Fletcher and Collins for lateness. Anyone else that we've heard from? I'm happy to move those. Councillor Filipino will second. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. And we'll wait till Dean gets here and we'll just make a little speech to thank our Dean, but you'll notice we've got Koro Dickinson who is here in Dean's place. I just want to really welcome Koro to the hot seat, and I think you all know Koro well, but he's been doing some fantastic work behind the scenes alongside this incredible team of women who actually run the council on my right here. So while we just pretend that we do the business. Yeah, don't mess with the South African front bench is all I can say between us two. So we'll move on. Declarations of interest. Please let us know if any declarations of interest arise, if there are any now that anyone wants to mention. If not, just make that known. And I'm happy to move the minutes of the 9th of April, if there's someone who'll second that. Councillor Sayers, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, we've got no petitions, but we have got public input, and I'll just run you through the 3 bits of public input that we are not having. So we had Michael Fleck and Dr. Susan Pocket, who wanted to talk to us regarding the safety of radio frequency radiation. So this is to do with the 5G rollout. We've put that off because we're doing some work with central government to work out what the approach from central government is to the 5G rollout, and we'll touch on that very briefly when we come to item 12. Catherine Farmer requested her input on the Marganav Reserve land exchange as a private person, not as a member of her local board, but Catherine had actually been a submitter to the process, and it's not appropriate to be a submitter and then come and speak again. And Wendy Gray asked to speak about the Green Corridor. Wendy and I are going to have a meeting and we're going to talk the issues through because they're probably much wider than just the 10 minutes of public input can provide for. So very keen to follow that up, and then as needed Wendy can come and address us. So hopefully that makes sense. So we'll move on to our 3 presentations that we are going to have in public input, and I'd like to welcome Genevieve Maria Ford, I think. Oh, she's here, who's going to talk to us about, I think, climate change and recycling and waste. So warm welcome, and the next 5 minutes are yours to present, and then there'll be questions. So please just take any seat that works for you. And on the speaker in front of you is a little button that says talk, and that's the one you press. If the light goes on, you're good to go. Welcome.
I think I'm loud enough. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're away now.
Thank you. I'm away now. Oh, where am I going? Hi, everyone. Kia ora. My name, first of all, thank you, Penny Holz. Excuse me, I've just my word. Our chairperson of the committee, for giving me this opportunity. I appreciate that. My name is Genevieve Ford. I live in Manly and on the Whangaparaoa Peninsula. Firstly, I wish to acknowledge the tangata whenua, the people of Aotearoa, the land of Aotearoa. And also, particular iwi or tribe of this area where we are meeting in Aotearoa. So, I also acknowledge our Pacific sisters and brothers whose islands are under threat because of the continued inaction on climate change by developed countries like Aotearoa and Australia. I also acknowledge all the people, particularly in South and Central America, who have given their lives protecting the forest from destruction and the land from destructive projects. My speech is called Our House is Burning. That's Greta Thunberg, of course. Her description of the earth as it is at the moment because of climate change. Before I get to the issue of climate change, I want to say that I'm very disappointed with the Auckland Council's decision to allow more concrete in the Waitemata Harbour. I believe there is a court challenge to this anti-environmental decision. I hope it succeeds, nothing personal. I also want to ask the Council and the Environment Committee to get rid of the millions of plastic bags that are being used to collect rubbish in the Auckland region every week and replace them with recycled paper bags, now available in supermarkets, and preferably provide permanent rubbish bins to everyone, free of charge. A plastic bag takes 10 to 100 years to break down in a landfill, which also emits methane. The landfill, not the plastic bag. A paper bag takes 4 to 6 weeks. Environmentally speaking, it's a no-brainer. I've got 4 pages. I'm going to page 2 now, so you know where I am if you want to stop me. My main concern and reason for...
You're fine. Don't
Okay,
just
thank you.
take time to have a sip of water and
No.
have a deep breath and...
I'm fine if it's not used to.
Sure.
My main concern and reason for being here is climate change, the existential threat we all face. Politicians have a huge responsibility to deal with this existential crisis humanity now faces. I hope the urgency of the problem and the ecological breakdown of our planet is recognised by the members of this committee and all council members. Time is of the essence. I'll just repeat that last bit. Time is of the essence. The UN-appointed group of 91 climate scientists from 40 countries told us last October that if we are to save the planet from climate disaster, we need to reduce our global warming gas emissions by 45% in 11 years to zero by 2050. So that's 45% in 12 years from last October. That means we have now 11 years and 7.5 months to get to 45% reduction in our global warming emissions. The report said reaching these targets would require far-reaching and unprecedented changes to all aspects of society and transitions in land use, energy, industry, buildings, transport and cities. The co-chair of one of the 3 working groups of scientists, Deborah Roberts, said, "The next few years are probably the most important in our history." I think she meant the history of humanity. The cause of our problem is A, corporate greed, in particular corporations dealing in fossil fuels, industrial farming such as Fonterra here in Aotearoa, and the destruction of forests. And B, governments continuing to subsidise and protect these planet-wrecking corporations, such as is still happening in Aotearoa, despite the huge greenwash coming out of our current government, which is also permitting and encouraging more oil, gas and coal extraction, and has started importing coal from Indonesia for the Huntly Power coal and gas burning station for our electricity, instead of investing in clean energy, solar panels and wind. So our global warming emissions are going up, not down. Page 3. The gap between political rhetoric and action all over the planet as here is large, and our planet is dying. So I hope the Auckland committees, the Auckland Council committees, the Auckland councillors, will be different and put out an honest climate report, as I believe you're going to do, a report anyway, containing bold, practical steps to reduce Auckland's emissions according to the climate report of last October. First thing, declare a climate emergency, call a spade, help people understand the seriousness of the problem we face. The second thing is to get rid of any investments or subsidies you might have in industries harmful to the planet. Fossil fuels and Fonterra, big dairy, is as much a threat to the climate as big oil, until they, Fonterra, for example, start behaving like responsible global citizens and reduce the cow numbers by 4% a year to get to the 45% needed for 2030, not 1%. And also to stop more dairy expansions and harmful fertilisers that are poisoning our land and our rivers, as well as emitting global warming gases far more potent than CO2 in the short term, and the short term is the time that we have to act. The next 10 years are absolutely crucial. The third thing is forget about the Paris Agreement, not to be rude, but it's too vague. Zero 2050 emissions and all that. Focus on the things we can do now to get Auckland to 45% reduction in greenhouse gases by October 2030, with help from your scientific advisors about how to do that. That means focus on the next 3 years that you are in office if you are voted back in October. No pies in the sky. In Auckland, the main problem to deal with, as well as buildings, waste and industrial pollution, is the traffic. 17% of our emissions, that's nationally, 17% of our emissions. Private cars are destroying the planet. They need to be marginalised much more. Page 4. Public transport needs to be electric as soon as possible, and I hope the government moves to stop the import of fossil fuel vehicles from 2022 or even sooner. Priority on roads has to be given to public transport. No interruption to bus lanes as now. Much more room for cyclists. It's not safe for cyclists in parts of Auckland, and pedestrians need to be respected as well. Give us time to cross the road in safety, for goodness sake. Rail infrastructure is a priority. I hope that the line from the city to the airport is finished in 5 years, not 10. I hope the cycle path over the Auckland Harbour Bridge is built quickly. I don't know what the delays are there. And a train over the harbour is also a priority. And also, inner cities, I think, should have no cars altogether and become green. Allow the land to regenerate naturally everywhere, plant trees, protect nature wherever you can. Allow space for community gardens all over the place. The transformative possibilities of climate change presents to us are very healthy and creative, and will help us to live in tune with the earth instead of trying to bully it into submission, as the Irish gardener, she would say guardian of the land, Mary Reynolds, says we're trying to do, and in the process destroying our habitat. This is our chance to reconnect with the earth and become more peaceful, responsible global citizens. We need politicians who are up to the challenge, not afraid to change things, and create the global leadership people are hoping for before it is too late. Thank you for listening.
Genevieve, thank you very much.
Okay.
So I'm sure there'll be a couple of questions, but just a couple of really brief responses. With regard to the rubbish collection, we're currently in the process of procuring our 3-bin model for the region, and you're still under what was the old Rodney collection, which is the only area in Auckland that has an independent rubbish collection.
Oh, really?
And they have the bags. So in other areas we have the bins, and we're going to be rolling the bins out throughout the whole region. So I thought,
I lived in South Auckland.
Sure.
Bags. I lived in Browns Bay. Bags.
Yeah.
I came here. So I
so
thought. And
that's one thing that hopefully will give you a little bit of hope, and that's a procurement that has sustainability at its heart.
But can I just say, before we get to that, I don't know how far away that is. Why can't we have paper bags and not plastic ones?
And because it's a private contractor who provides refuse collection to Rodney, council has we have no ability to interfere, but that's what the new procurement will bring about. Secondly, we've got our climate change action plan comes to next month's committee meeting, so you're really welcome to attend, and it would be really good to have you there. And thirdly, and this council is very active in the New Zealand-wide response to climate change and climate change planning, and the Mayor has certainly been right at the heart of that work. So, time for 2 quick questions. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Look, Maria, thank you very much for both a passionate and genuine presentation to Council. That's very appreciative. Look, you raised so many issues. This is probably difficult for me to ask you a question. So I'm going to suggest that you sit down with your 2 councillors and go through your issues, because they will be able to answer a number of the questions that you have posed. Rather than use this forum for that. So they're sitting around the table here, and I suggest that they quickly have a bit of a chat and swap phone numbers and be in touch. All right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Watson, one of your councillors.
Hi Genevieve, thank you for coming all the way down from Whangaproa Peninsula to give an excellent delivery today. And it's very appropriate, because I was listening to I think it's the new Secretary General of the United Nations, who basically was mirroring that sense of urgency that you have articulated so well today. I just want to get your feedback on his view. Was really that the future lay with the young people mobilising their their political power, because they are the ones who, of course, will live with the consequences.
We're living with them now.
Yes. Do you have any view on the desirability or the ability to try and mobilise the young generation to bring that sense of urgency?
I think they're doing it themselves. I don't think they need my help, really. I just want to say, look, I'm a person, I'm upset about this, and I'm going to say something. That's basically it.
Good on you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
So I just want to assure you that there are certainly some councillors around this table that are passionate. So I funded myself at my cost to the Paris climate talks in 2015, also went earlier to Rio and other climate talks. So I live and breathe that issue. So I'm just emphasising that there are some people around the table that are equally passionate.
That's right.
And you're commended. Thank you very much.
It's the actions that count. Okay. Thank you.
So Councillor Walker and Councillor Watson, would you like to move and second the happy to move? Councillor Walker, second. Councillor Watson, the thanks and appreciation to Genevieve for her presentation, and happy to keep in touch and happy to provide any information that is useful to you. So I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. And thank you very much for your time and your passion.
Thanks for you.
So moving on to our next public input, I'd like to warmly welcome our community conservation groups from the Waitakere Ranges area, all well known to many of us. We've got, actually, Annalise, are you leading the contingent, or is it going to be John leading the contingent?
I'm going to speak first.
John, would you like to introduce
Yes,
the team?
we will, if we get our PowerPoint on.
Wonderful. So warm welcome in the next 10 minutes.
We're on, okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. John Summich. I'm trustee of Mautuku Link and originator of the Ark in the Park. With me are Gillian Wadham, who's the manager of the Ark in the Park, Auckland's largest volunteer conservation project going for 17 years on regional park land, and Lily van den Broek, who's the chair of Forest and Bird Waitakere, and Robert Wolfe, Pest Free Waitakere. And we're here also representing some of the groups listed on your screen up there. Te akina ngā manu ka ora te ngāhere, ke ora te ngāhere, ka ora te manu. This whakatauki was granted to the Ark in the Park at its inception in 2002. It says that if we look after the birds, then the forest will thrive. If the forest thrives, then so will the birds. But how well are we actually doing? In the early days, we were doing very well, 0 to 5% rat numbers, which are a good indicator that the birds can breed successfully. But in 2014, we had a mast year with lots of tree species fruiting heavily, leading to an explosion in rat numbers, followed by an explosion in stoats. Mast years will become more frequent as a result of global warming, and we're seeing another mast year this year. These are photos taken this year from Kahikatea on the left and Rimu on the right. And rat numbers have been high since the last mast year in 2014. So even with best efforts, we're not getting on top of them. Our biodiversity and birds can flourish with high rat and mustard numbers. On top of this, we have the kauri dieback disease, which means we need to reduce foot traffic in the forest to protect our kauri. Are we looking after our forest and our birds? How are we doing? And are we living up to the Wakataki?
To help answer that question, we can compare the Waitakere with the Hunua Ranges. Both are large areas of forest on Auckland's outer edges, with predator crop control undertaken via community groups and staff. There is a key difference in the predator control methodology, that being the use of aerial 1080 at Hunua in 2015 and 2018. What benefits have those operations brought? Here you can see two equivalent graphs of rat numbers with the Hunua Ranges on the top and the Ark results on the bottom. As you know, no aerial drops of any toxins have occurred in the Waitakere Ranges. So at Ark in the Park, on the bottom graph, since the most recent mast year in 2014, rat numbers have stayed high. However, in the Hunua ranges, because rat numbers have remained below the crucial 5% since the 1080 operation, you can see the line there in September 2015 indicating when the first 1080 operation occurred and the corresponding very low rat numbers from there to date. So as a quick aside, 1080 operations in the Hunua ranges achieve not only very effective but very efficient predator control. For example, it takes 3 months to complete a ground-based baiting round at Ark in the Park, while it would take a helicopter 1 hour to deliver an aerial toxin over the same area of 2,270 hectares. So that was rats. Now the biodiversity response. Here is a comparison of numbers of kōkako pairs with far greater increase in the Hunua ranges. The Hunua ranges are shown with the orange bars there. Of course, kōkako are not the only birds flourishing and rats are not the only predators. However, data is kept most comprehensively for rats and kōkako at both sites, so we can use these as indicators. And graphs tell a compelling story, but of course there are tangible impacts too, as seen here with Zella, a Waitakere kōkako whose tail has been injured as a result of a run-in with a predator. She sadly abandoned her nest after this. So what can we do to achieve the same success as at the Hunua ranges?
The key difference in breeding success is the predator control method. We know the use of 1080 is an emotive and contentious issue, and we applaud the council and you as councillors for your bold decision to use it in the Hunua ranges. We here as community groups in the Waitakere ranges hope this vision and courage will extend our way. And therefore we're asking you this, to start the process of a feasibility study into the use of 1080 in selected parts of the Waitakere ranges with the exclusion of populated areas for a first drop in 2021, followed by one in 2024. Forest and Bird is the largest independent conservation organisation in New Zealand, and we are willing to help and support Council with strong backing and advocacy. The combined branches of Forest and Bird in Auckland region have just under 6,000 members. The recent Forest and Bird donation drive was the most successful appeal ever, with the highest median donation amount. It was for 1080, indicating a strong support for all predator control tools. 25% of the donors are from the Auckland region. We're here on behalf of all the groups listed above who are in support of this feasibility study. And inspired by Predator-Free 2050 and Pest-Free Auckland, people are motivated to look after their environment. And they're motivated by seeing and hearing more birds in their backyards. Spillover from birds from Ark in the Park has occurred to Bethel's and to Arataki, and most recently to Scenic Drive, where kōkako are nesting on private property. This is the Ark buffer zone, where over 120 properties are actively involved with trapping and baiting. These birds create the opportunity for great stories, and a live encounter with a native feathered friend is the best engagement tool possible. This Facebook post reached over 33,000 people, and all the responses were like, love, or wow, as you can do the little clicking button, and there were no negative ones. So this is just one post of one kōkako that reached that many people.
So we've spoken about the ecology and the increased engagement of the community with the ecology and the suggested solution to improve the ecosystem in the Waitakere ranges. Other aspects to consider, of course, are that there are the communities along the coast of the Waitakere ranges and other groups of dwellings, but there are still thousands of hectares of wilderness far from these dwellings. Precise exclusion zones are easily achieved with real-time GPS tracking of helicopter flights. Hunua supplies 60% of Auckland's water, yet after those drops, all the required testing came back with no traces of 1080 found. Of course, the same stringent measure would be applied in the Waitakere ranges with flying exclusion zones and water testing. Dog walking is not allowed currently due to closures in the Waitakere ranges forested areas. In the Hunua, consultation, information and supplying of muzzles was an important part of the operation to protect people's dogs. There's no recreational hunting in the Waitakere Ranges, removing this as a point of contention. Best practice uses a range of tools in rotation for predator control. Volunteer-based pest control will still continue to manage reinvasions. And iwi, Te Kawarau of Mana Whenua over the Waitakere Ranges have confirmed their support of measures that best protect forest health and therefore support a feasibility study into the use of aerial 1080. So more frequent mast years, kauri dieback, current closure of the Waitakere Ranges. We believe this is the time for this work to begin. Thank you.
Thank you. 5 minutes.
Right, now I'm sure there will be a couple of questions. I guess thinking about it from Council's perspective, and this is not our time to debate this one way or the other, I think what we've heard from this incredibly well respected group, and I think for those of us from the West, we can't state highly enough that these people represent the creme de la creme of our environmental groups, and we're really privileged to have you here. So when you speak, we need to listen. And I think what we're hearing really clearly is that we want to do more in the protection of the Waitakere Ranges to manage our pests and our biodiversity. And just having a look at, we're looking at a $311 million natural environment targeted rate. This is a big slug of money that we can actually make work for areas like the Waitakere Ranges. So I think this is the start of a discussion about better and ramped up pest management, and I think that's the critical discussion that we need to start with. How that manifests and what tools we investigate, I think will be up to us to see where we're going to go with that. So, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, and I feel like I'm speaking to environmental royalty here. I just wanted to ask a question, because I know we've had this discussion before, and a lot of people would say, oh, well, why don't you just use different types of pesticides, why don't you, if what you're using now isn't working, and you can see even before the track closures, things were getting difficult. What would you say to people around that, are there other methods other than 1080 that would be effective, or is it still that whole foot carrying, tramping through the forest, etc., and the number of volunteers?
Shall I start on this one? Yep. So that's a very good question, and best practice shows that a range of toxins should be used in rotation, and we are currently experimenting with that, and we have tried one other toxin, and a third toxin is now under use in trial. The problem with all of those other toxins is that they are far more labour intensive than our standard one, and they actually result in more foot traffic on the ground. So with any ground-based operation, we're managing the risk of kauri dieback, and that's only lifted with an aerial operation which provides relief for that time. And the other toxins, like I say, have their downsides, such as needing to put twice as much out, which is twice as labour intensive. With speaking for Ark in the Park here, we don't have the volunteer capacity to do that.
Thank you.
And I can also say that trapping is done for stoats and mustelids. We also have a trial area with some of those multi-kill traps, but those techniques on their own aren't sufficient, and the combined trapping and baiting we're doing, as you've seen there, is not holding. We were doing well in the early years. The mast year came along. We both trap and we bait with conventional traps and baits, and that hasn't been sufficient.
The question was, so in terms of having the tracks closed, I know you're allowed to go along some, but you can't still access all of your area. What would be what's the trajectory if you can't get in there or we don't do anything in terms of not just with the pests or the danger to our native birds, but in terms of our fauna, our flora as well? I mean, I think we've talked about some of that, the effects on that if you just let things run rampant in terms of the pests?
So we would risk a decline in both the plant life and the wildlife covering birds, lizards, frogs. We've, the work that we do is not now holding the line in the way that it was, and any reduction in that work would be a severe risk to the gains that have been accumulated, especially for the species that have been reintroduced to the Waitakere Ranges. We would be at risk of losing those for a second time.
Councillor, yeah. Councillor Filipina?
Thank you, Chair. Look, and I just want to acknowledge the presenters, but I've got a question to you, Chair. Is that okay? Yeah, look, the question is based on the presentation, and it was around Te Kawerau Maki and a feasibility study around it. So where do we go with that in regards to the presentation? I just wanted to find out where the process would be.
Thanks, Councillor. In my head, listening to that and, listening to the wider issues underneath this, I think our next stage is to talk to the groups involved in the context of what else can we do. We've got a serious amount of money now with our environmental targeted rate. What can we do to really ramp up the opportunities provided by the closed parts of the Waitakere Ranges, and also work in partnership with our surrounding landowners to really build on that buffer zone, because part of our targeted rate is actually directed at community partnerships and community initiatives. So I think rather than making the work about simply a feasibility study into 1080, which for many of us, including this wonderful group and our staff who've been subjected to the death threats and everything else that goes with that, I think let's put the context of this around how do we ramp up what we're going to do, but not shy away from the fact that we need to look at all the tools in the toolbox and balance them up against each other. So that feels like the next step, Councillor. Comfortable? And including, of course, Te Kawerau Maki. And last question, Councillor Hills.
And apologies, Madam Chair, it's just a quick comment, just to thank you. And I don't think we're the brave ones, it is the brave staff and contractors and volunteers who put up with the death threats and the slash tyres and all the other stuff they've had to deal with during the 1080 discussion. And as you say, the evidence is there that it's saving our bird life and forest. But I also want to thank you for, it is not up to you guys, but all the work and advocacy you do as community groups, environmental groups, really helps the discussion, because people think, oh, big bad council, it must, but to have the backing of the environmental groups and the people who are out there doing the work on the ground, it actually backs up what we're trying to do, saving our birds. So thank you very much.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. I've got two quick questions. I'm going to keep to a very quick timeline. We're actually finishing this meeting at 1:10 today, so just putting everyone on notice. If I do curtail the questions, it's because we will possibly lose a quorum after that. Councillor Clow.
Yeah, sorry for being late. I declare an interest as a member of Forest and Bird and Waitakere Ranges Protection Society. Two questions, as I'm supportive of this. In the area where the population lives, what would you propose we do there? Is that just an education campaign? That's my first question. The other one is, it's an impressive list of groups you've got there, but like all families, there seems to be usually a few black sheep. The Waitakere Ranges Protection Society, do they have a different view? They were not on the list.
Not all the groups had the time to bring this question back to their membership. So if they're not on the list, it doesn't mean they're against it. It's just they haven't had time to form their opinion yet, because it is a big question. Yes. We have had quite a lot of support of individuals from groups who said, you can put my name on there, but we didn't want to do that because we don't want to name individuals. But they were just not, sometimes the groups themselves, there's one group in specific that wasn't comfortable having their name on there, not because they're not supportive, but because they already had so much vandalism of their traps, they didn't want to risk more of that if this comes out in the open, because their traps are quite accessible. So that answers your second question.
Yep.
To answer your first one, I'm also a buffer zone coordinator for Bethels and Scenic Drive, and we've got street coordinators there, and they do an amazing job in advocacy and education, because there's a lot of misinformation out there on a lot of predator control tools. People don't know the difference between a bait station and a trap, a toxin and a lure. As soon as you start having that conversation, well-informed, rational, and allying those fears with facts and a friendly face, it really helps. And that is, I think, what should be part of the feasibility study, to see what the best engagement tools are around properties.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm wondering, could you circulate your presentation? I think that the information around the comparative biodiversity of the two ranges is really powerful. I've been I'm from the south, so I mean I've been subject to some of the most appalling, just the most rancid shit that gets fired at me because of the 1080 drops in the Hunua ranges. But your information is very compelling, and I think along with things like recreational hunting for possum eradication and things like that, that would be great. So, but also, Chair, I'm wondering if officers could provide some advice as to their understanding of the biodiversity rates in the two ranges, because I think it builds a very compelling argument. And I understand that the two ranges are different in terms of one's pretty closed and the other one's rather populated, but it does make for a pretty compelling argument that a different approach to pest eradication is something that needs to be explored. And so could I ask you, Chair, if that information could be got from staff, because I think that that should help to inform a future discussion on this issue.
And the PowerPoint is there for people to use. We also have a handout which we can give to staff later to circulate as well, if that's okay through the chair.
And we'll pop the presentation, make sure everyone's got access to that. Councillor Cooper will move the acknowledgement of the presentation. Who would like? Councillor Filipaina will second that. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. And thank you most warmly for the day-to-day work that you do. It's extraordinary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And our final presentation is on the Te Whau pathway, and I'd like to welcome Tony Miguel and team. Warm welcome. And I'll get you to do the introductions, Tony. Thank you.
There we go. Failed the first test. Yes, kia ora and thank you for your time. I'd just like to introduce myself, Tony Miguel, Chair of the Whau Coastal Walkway Environmental Trust, and I am Rabindov, and Gilbert Breaky, who is a Deputy Chairperson. Also, I just want to acknowledge the support from Council staff, Mace Ward, who's our sponsor, Martin and Jill, and also Craig McElroy and Gail Ogilvie and Barry Potter, who've been very supportive of the project to date. Certainly without their support, we wouldn't be able to be where we are today. So just really wanted to give you a quick update where we're at, and also talk to you about our request for funding and the proposal to kick off an environmental program. So just by the way of introduction, I think I came to this committee about 2 years ago, but as for you who are not familiar with the project, essentially it's a link from the Manukau to the Waitemata Harbour, following the portage, It builds on the existing cycleway along Portage Road. It connects the Henderson and Massey local wards and the Far local wards and 3 electorates, and essentially is a shared path for pedestrians and cyclists. Here's the proposed staging, obviously subject to funding. We haven't got any long-term funding secured for the project. We have secured approximately 6 million to that from council and 2 million from outside sources. The proposal is to complete the stages. One of the issues we have at the moment is we have sections completed, but they're not linked. So it is kind of a bit meaningless without the sections being completed. Ideally, aiming to get it finished by 2024, subject to funding. And here's some of the key indicators. So it's 15 kilometres long. It's connected to 23 schools. So we started to engage the schools in the project, mainly the Kelston hub. There's over 7,000 students. It connects 30 parks. So it's quite a unique opportunity for council to provide a connector in the park network. About 6.5 kilometres of the boardwalk are out in the coastal environment, and it's nearly 100,000 residents. This is a 2005 figure, so with the rate of growth in New Lynn, I'm sure it's grown since then. I just want to acknowledge our partners. So firstly, council, Auckland Transport, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, Te Kauramaki, and the Henderson and Far local boards. So here's our objective. So this is more than just building a bit of concrete or a bit of boardwalk. The objectives are firstly to facilitate and build a shared walking and cycling path from Greenway to Te Aratu, to provide connections with the regional walking and cycling network. In the middle of the network is a connection to the New Lynn Transport Interchange, and also a connection to the proposed New Lynn to Avondale path along the railway line, and a connection to the Northwestern Shared Path. And also there's talk of a proposed Te Aratu Transport Interchange near the Te Aratu motorway interchange, so it'll provide a connector to that. To provide a more safe and more convenient route for cycling and commuting. So the studies show that for those 30-odd schools, the 23 schools, sorry, most of them could be accessed by the path by about 1 to 2 kilometres. And quite interestingly, a very safe connection into Avondale. The next objective is to connect communities, promote health and recreation, to increase the levels of walking and cycling, and reduce car trips. Very importantly, to provide access to the Far River. So one of those strategies has been to build a pontoon, which is originally designed for Wakama launching, but it's actually proved very successful with swimmers. And the bit that we're about to launch now is improving the natural environment, integrated aquatic and terrestrial environment, and very important to share and celebrate the state of our history. And if you look, it's interesting, if you look at this photo here, if I can use the pointer. The photo in the bottom is from 1930, and you can see how different the river was. Most of the water now has disappeared, it's been taken over by the mangroves, but it actually, the caption says, celebrate the start of the 1930 boating season. So quite a big history of boating in the area, and we certainly think that's appropriate to celebrate that, as well as the Maori heritage. So the budget, the project cost is about 64 million with 30% contingency. Possible funding could be by NCTA, 34 million, Auckland Council, 25, and our trust could probably raise 5 odd million. At the moment, it's not committed in the LTP. Interestingly enough, your LTP has got a statement, this is a priority project, but no funding whatsoever for it. So somewhere we missed there, joining the dots there. Cost benefit modelling, so this is 2015 figures, so we're just going to get these updated. The benefit cost ratio is 2.4. Demand 340,000 cyclists. Approximately nearly 200 cyclists from the Te Aratu end will use the benefit, and quite obviously because of the connection to the Northwest Cycleway. Travel time savings 2.4. The health benefits are the major benefit, which in itself is a bit of a barrier with transport agencies, because the transport agencies are only looking at travel benefits, so we're trying to promote a more holistic approach. Safety benefits 2.1 million and vehicle operating costs 6 million. So our current work program at the moment, the resource consent has just been lodged. It's gone through the council process. We expect it to be publicly notified in July. There's a construction of a pathway from Camonda to Riceville Reserve. So that's funded. That hopefully will be finished towards the end of this year. We're planning for the first stage of a pathway from Riceville Reserve to Olympic Park and requested funding from council towards this project. We think this is actually probably the best benefit, immediate benefit for the project, in that it provides a totally off-road link from Newland to Avondale, probably saving about nearly 1.5 kilometres in travel for cyclists. We have a planting program planned to kick off as part of Arbor Day right through to September. We've started an environmental education plan, working with council partners and the schools. We have some public information days planned for June, which are really focused on the resource consent application. And we started the scoping for environmental restoration plan for the Fireable Catchment, which is, we think this is a new concept in New Zealand. It hasn't really been done in the sense that, here we go. So what is the action plan? Well, firstly, it's a way of integrating conservation planning and infrastructure. It provides the foundation for a catchment approach based on ecosystems with quite emphasis on conservation and consultation. And it's geared towards delivering the greatest benefits for aquatic resource restoration and species and landscape. And quite interestingly, following on our previous presenters, the concept, traditionally we've tended to look at catchments just as water and looked at land, but this actually almost the other way around. If we look after the land, and we look after the plants and the trees, the water will look after itself. So it's that subtle change. Obviously, it's important to take into account the water infrastructure. So the benefits is, firstly, it's a single plan. So it does look at water quality, quantity, the flooding that happened there in the catchment 2 years ago, biodiversity and map priority locations, better avoidance and minimisation of impact, so a lot of emphasis on the front end. And in particular, this catchment is very challenging because of the growth pressure. So on one hand, there's pressure to cut down trees to provide for growth. And on the other hand, we want to try and protect what few trees are left. It's a way of providing for the stakeholders to work together and better consideration of the landscape level insights, goals, catchment goals, restoration, recovery priorities for results, and possibility for effective action. And the idea is, while the plan is being developed, is to actually get on and do some projects. So, as an example, there's opportunities to provide bioswales in Archibald Park, which will provide not only cleaning up the stormwater, but also an education component. There's an opportunity to look at some riparian restoration and stream restoration daylighting to help mitigate the flooding effects. So one of the benefits is that conservation investments can occur sooner rather than later. So one of the first steps is to actually develop an integrated database and look at where things are happening, where there's funding, and see how we can bring all those together. Better site identification. So the principle there is to actually end up with a GIS map for the whole catchment, and residents can then click on their property, can see what they could be doing on their property to restore the catchment, as well as providing all the relevant information. And funding can be planned and integrated for the environmental improvements. So what are the processes? Very, very strong in building and strengthening relationships. And in a project like this, there's very good examples in the United States. And typically, you find that you might spend, if the project takes 2 years, you might spend 1.5 years building the relationships. Because it's really important. If you don't get the relationships right, you can't really implement the program. The next step is to create an ecosystem framework for the Fireable Catchment. And the reason why the Fire Pathway is interested in the catchment is because the pathway is actually a corridor within the catchment, so it actually provides an agreed network, if you like, for the catchment. Define the scenarios for the assessment. then create an ecosystem framework, an infrastructure development framework. And a lot of this work council's really doing in some ways. For example, you got Healthy Waters doing quite a lot of water quality monitoring. You got Biodiversity doing stock take. And then the next step is to prioritise the ecological actions, develop creating strategy. This is controversial, but this is the possibility of looking at environmental offsets. So in a catchment like this, it's not possible to be pure. It's already highly modified. So, you know, we'll have to look at perhaps it's an offset, maybe downstream. And I think Council's done some work on environmental offsets, but I'm not sure where it's got to. The next step is develop consultation program and the implementation. So you see, before you actually start doing anything, you actually have to complete those 7 steps before you actually rush into any actual detailed program. That doesn't stop progress being made. And the next one is the feedback loop, which is to update the ecosystem framework, the scenarios and regional assessment. So very briefly, I'll probably give you a lot of information in a brief period of time. Let's just introduce the concepts. I do want to again thank Council for the support we've had to date. Also the various foundations that have supported us, and the Council staff who without this project wouldn't be able to be possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Di or Gilbert, anything to add, or are you happy to take questions at this stage? Okay. All right. Sorry. Councillor Casey.
Yep, I've always been supportive of this and continue to be so. I'm just interested in your modelling figures for cycling and pedestrian, and whether you've updated that with regards to the Waterview Shared Path, which is, as you know, a huge success. And the word commute rung a bell for me, but just that, do you still stand by the figures you produced today, or do you think that you need to do more work?
Yes, thank you for the question. We definitely need to do some more work, because the modelling was based on the 2013 census, so it's quite out of date. There's been a lot of growth in New Zealand, and also we want to look at the impact of the cycleways. And I think what the modelling didn't do also, it was very confined just to the pathway itself. We need to look at the whole network, the whole Western network. So we actually going to take off that work on Friday, actually.
I think this will be the best thing to happen to the full Barnum.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. I absolutely agree, and I hope councillors are listening to this, even though it might not be in your area. If you think about how council needs to do its business into the future, it's about integrating meaningful and important infrastructure like cycle and walkways together with cleaning up the environment around it. And this is, we're not doing anything like this in the Auckland region. This is an extraordinary piece of work, and I don't know whether it's appropriate, but I want to acknowledge Craig McElroy, who's here, and Healthy Waters have grabbed the opportunity to do monitoring and work within as a subset of this large piece of work, and they're already sourcing some of the problems that we've got within our faux catchment, tracking them back on land and doing the work to fix the problems with various exacerbators of bad water quality. In other words, businesses that need a little bit of a clean-up, who've happily done a clean-up, and the foe is in better condition as a result. So I do hope that people understand the enormity of this project, and thank you, Councillor Casey, for pointing that out. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. If we listen to Genevieve Ford earlier, this is actually an expression of a lot of the things she asked us to do. So I guess my question is why don't you think, even though we've got it in our long-term plan as a priority, but there's no money next to it, what do you think the barriers might be here? You know, in terms, you know, because the numbers are big and scary, but the outcomes are extraordinary. So what do you think it is that might be the stumbling block here for us to actually get some money into the columns?
Through the Chair, well, I can't speak for council processes, but I think one of the issues we're challenging with is that the cost-benefit model is very narrow. So it doesn't look if we go to Auckland Transport, they will only look at the transport benefits. But in terms of social and cultural and health and environmental benefits, I think we need to do some more work on that to make a convincing business case.
You think that's how we should be looking at it? Because we do have the ability to look at social and environmental outcomes as well. I mean, I think that's, if we're just looking at AT, I think it maybe is that where the way we need to be looking at it, rather than what does AT say? What are the outcomes we have in a myriad of different plans? You know, physical activation, public transport activation, you know, active transport, water quality, because it's very much about water quality as well. Maybe that's it. Now, the other question I had was, and I'll leave it.
Right, and Councillor Clow, you're wanting to move this, and you've got a question.
But yeah, I just as part answer to Councillor Cooper's question, we know that NZTA is really a big stumbling block. What are you doing to lobby ministers, including Mr Twyford, but NZTA, to try and reassess their criteria for supporting these sorts of active transportation routes that don't align with main highways, because that seems to be where that's their criteria at the moment. It seems to be aligning, it has to be close to a main highway or along, but there's no linkages allowed. Are you doing work to try and get NZTA to see the light? Because it's not just this project, it's many projects around the country.
Yeah, yes, through the chair, that's a priority for us. We would like to update the cost-benefit basis first, so we've got a more compelling case, but hopefully by about the end of June we'll have the work completed and we'll start the advocacy component. Interesting enough, one of the comments we've had from people is that with the carry dieback and tracks being close in the Waitakere ranges, there's actually limited opportunities for walking and cycling out west, so this project would actually help to offset that effect.
And final question, Councillor Newman.
Thank you and good morning. I mean, listening carefully to what Ross just said, and I agree with him around NZTA's narrow interpretation of what it should be doing, but have you, because I really see merit in this, and have you looked at the Southern Corridor improvements in South Auckland, where that it's a $268 million project to widen the Southern Motorway, but actually around about 8% of the capital cost is being spent on active walking and cycling through a cycleway which is not connected to the Southern Motorway but adjacent to it, resplendid with its own cycling overbridges at Karaka into Papakura. I mean, I see that there is plenty of synergy there between that sort of project and this sort of project, but I wonder if NZTA is deliberately choosing not to look at what it's doing elsewhere in order to try and resist its calls for this type of investment. Are you aware of those other projects where NZTA are fronting up with very, very significant funding? Because that's over $20 million that they're having to put into that piece of active cycling and walking infrastructure.
So, Chair, no, I'm not aware of them, but we'll follow the lead, because there's definitely I mean, one of the suggestions we've had is that perhaps in the future, with the widening of the next stage of State Highway 16, it may be possible to leverage of that, but we'll certainly follow that suggestion. Thank you.
I mean, Chair, I think as a piece of analysis for this particular, the Te pathway, that Southern Corridor investment, I mean, that's a 4.5 kilometre shared use pedestrian cycle path for about $24 million. It's an extraordinary amount of money to spend. I'm pleased that it's happening, but to be honest, I would have thought that this sort of project would be far easier than the Southern Motorway project, and therefore there shouldn't be a problem in NZTA helping it. And given that there is no link between that shared use pedestrian cycle path and the Southern Motorway, because you wouldn't want that, I don't see why the argument couldn't be applied here as well. I think there's plenty of scope if there can be some advice prepared by Council and Auckland Transport to have that argument with NZTA, understanding that there are all sorts of problems with that business case work that NZTA is requiring. There should really be no difference between the two projects. They should be helping this. So if some advice could be got, I'd be very keen to see that and to support it. Thank you.
It's a really wise suggestion, thank you. Okay, so Councillor Clow will move and Councillor Casey will second that we receive and thank our presenters. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And I think that was an excellent suggestion of Councillor Newman's. Please go in hope. And thank you for the awesome work on this and the work that's happening right now as we speak. Thank you. So we'll move on to local board input. There were no requests for local board input. Okay, how long is he going to be here? Okay, we'll wait. We'll just... Okay, all right, good. Fine. So we'll move on to item number 8, which is our response, our submission to the Department of Conservation's proposal to revoke certain ministerial delegations to TLAs. I know we've had a lot of discussion about this. The submission is attached. The strongly worded letter that elected members asked for to be sent has been sent to the Minister, and hopefully we will okay the submission today. So who's going to kick off? Right, let's do it.
Thank you. So as you said, on 14th of March we received a letter from the Department of Conservation to all territorial authorities seeking feedback on the proposal to revoke most of the ministerial powers under the Reserves Act, which are currently delegated to Council. The submission has been drafted in response to this with the benefit of staff and elected member feedback. Its key point really is that Council does not support the proposal to revoke 44 of the 50 delegated ministerial powers, and staff recommend that the Environment and Community Committee approve this submission.
Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Happy to move. Councillor Simpson, second. Oh, do you want to second Councillor Bartley and ask a question? Okay, so Simpson and Bartley, and question from Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Thank you for the item. I just wanted to know, is there any advice around identifying new delegation proposals besides reviewing the Reserves Act guide?
Through the Chair, no, there is not. We've just added in that we believe they need to update their guidance and they need to review or substantially change the Act given its age.
Any other questions or comments on this, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think the letter and the submission are both appropriate in the circumstances. I just had a couple of questions. The first was, have you had any informal feedback through the central, well, through the Department of Conservation bureaucracy, I guess, as to whether they're having second thoughts about this and what other responses have been made by other local authorities?
Through the Chair, apologies, I was looking for Mace Ward, who has had some contact with the Department of Conservation, but I just can't see him at the moment.
Hold that question, Mr. Mayor. If Mace comes back...
Yeah, I can hold that question and just ask a couple of other more mundane questions. The suggestion is that if these delegations were to be revoked, then that would require, in terms of our 4,000 reserves in Auckland, almost weekly decisions from ministers that there would be a delay and there would also be a cost. Can you elaborate on cost? Would the Department of Conservation be working on a cost recovery basis for having to examine the particular changes that were recommended to them? It wasn't clear from the submission.
Through the Chair, the Department of Conservation do have a cost recovery policy, and we anticipate that they would recover cost. So we can't confirm, we can anticipate, and made it very clear that we don't believe Aucklanders should pay for the Minister to exercise her functions if they do take them back. Previously, here is Mace, he can also talk about the kind of delays we used to have, particularly in leases, when previous to the delegations coming to council. So I think, Mace, the delegations, sometimes we used to wait 3 years for decisions, is my understanding. About the delays.
So, Madam Chair, Your Worship, yes, typically prior to the delegations coming to council and council as a whole, local boards and the governing body, it was between 2 and 3 years for management plans to be approved, and often leases that required ministerial delegations had quite a delay as well. So I think that's prefaced by the important point. The proposal, as it's worded now, would take away that community empowerment and the distance between community and delivery of those community benefits, and the decision making would be somewhat distant.
Supplementary question, Madam Chair. I mean, their concern seems to be a conflict of interest, that we would be making the initial decision and then making the decision that the Reserves Act 1977 gives to the Minister. Obviously, Council has the ability to look at what the ministerial consent involves, which is consistency with the legislation. Have we experienced difficulties? Have we had court cases that, or any other indication that we haven't been able to manage those dual roles consistently with the purposes of the Act?
Through the Chair, we have not, and we have also indicated that the Department of Conservation has also not provided any evidence that there is a prevalence of an inability to exercise those delegations amongst local government generally either.
Thank you, and if I can just repeat my question now that Mace has returned. This seems to have the appearance of being driven by officials spooked at a particular court case regarding Opua. What feedback have you had about the responses from other local authorities to the proposed revocations, and have you had any feedback through staff members working for DOC that they have come under pressure and they are reconsidering their position?
Thank you, Your Worship. In terms of the Department of Conservation staff, I think they still have an open mind. Certainly the Director General has been quite clear that this is an issue that is important for local government and empowering communities, so I think they have an open mind on this issue. In terms of other councils around the country, there's a unified view, it's fair to say, which is consistent with the submission we're recommending to you today. Apart from some smaller councils where capability and capacity might be an issue, and the unintended consequence in those situations would be handing back land to the Crown to administer and control and maintain.
Thanks. Okay, Councillor Sayers. Oh, sorry, Councillor Casey and Councillor Sayers.
This is one of the reasons we delegate submission writing to staff, because mine would have been really simple and it would just be 2 words and it would have saved a lot of time and money. Thank you for 14 pages and no expletives. I know. My question, though, follows on from the Mayor's, and it's with regard to the local government conference upcoming. I can't imagine any council in the country supporting this. And if it's not one of our remits, because the remit process starts months ago. But most definitely, with your permission as one of the delegates, I'll be raising this from the floor and getting a resounding no to it from across New Zealand. That was all. It wasn't a question. It was...
We hope it might be resolved before that, Councillor Casey. It would be really useful, but good point.
Very clever if she did.
It would be advisable if she did. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I may be well off point here, but just for my own clarification, this doesn't have any overlap or relationship with the work that we're doing around the freedom camping bylaws at all? No. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. No more comments. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And thank you, team, for the good work on this. Suad's just reminded me I forgot to mention that there was no urgent business, so we just need to get that on the record. And we'll move to item number 9. And again, pretty straightforward. Welcome, team. Again, thank you, Emma, for your ongoing work. And Paul, do you want to just outline for us what the key issues are, and then we'll take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So Council has been working through a proposal to exchange land with a private developer. This was publicly notified, and following a total of 83 submissions, a hearing was convened. We recommended an independent commissioner to attend the hearing and make a recommendation to this committee. He found that, in his view, the amenity and green space function of the reserve would be compromised by the land exchange, and recommended that the proposal be declined. On balance, we recommend to this committee that they accept the recommendations of the independent commissioner.
Councillor Cooper, seconded. Councillor Close, happy to second.
I just had a question.
Yep, questions.
It was around the Commissioner's recommendation. Where is it? Sorry, I'm trying to find it now. It was around going ahead with another process around classification. Is that condition going to be, or that recommendation going to be actioned, or what's your view on that? Trying to find it, sorry. Here it is. Yeah, it's on page 107 of our report, and his decision recommendation 4.41b. Initiates a formal classification of Margan Reserve under the Reserves Act, so that should a formal road application or plan change request subsequently be lodged, Council is in a position to proceed in the event that such is determined to be appropriate. Do we need to do anything?
Through the chair, the Commissioner was recommending that that the reserve be classified as currently unclassified, and the purpose of that is because there's a provision in the Reserves Act's 15AA, which was an amendment which relates to changes to the Resource Management Act, which allows for a application under the RMA to be publicly notified alongside a land exchange at the same time. So you would hear submissions from the public both on the reserve exchange as well as the aspects relating to the Resource Management Act. So the advice is that we will recommend to the local board that they consider classifying that reserve. So classifications of reserves is a local board function.
Okay, so then you'll carry on with it.
Correct.
Councillor Clow.
Because my question was just totally exactly the same, probably a little bit more forcefully saying, why are we not putting 4.1b as one of the resolute recommendations? I mean, we're looking about a housing site that's ready to go with another 3,000 units on it. It's really the last big piece of the jigsaw in New Lynn that's slowly getting built on, but the bottom line is there's another 3,000 houses there, and Council and the government has spent to date 450 million in New Lynn with the undergrounding and all the public works that have happened there, and we just can't seem to get the buildings sprouting, and they are going to come back with a master plan and all this sort of stuff. I mean, and in the end, it may not require a road, but I'd hate to see this delaying something again for another couple of years. I mean, because we're just not getting traction with the housing. And I mean, you know, as the mayoral proposal is going to reiterate, it's transport and housing. And as Mr. Twyford and the government saying it's housing, housing, housing. And so
Sorry,
you know,
Councillor,
I've probably just been a bit more forceful to say, well, why are we not trying to just at least give the local board a little bit more oomph to say, please do this in case it's needed.
Okay, so do you want to add a recommendation which just sort of gives that a nudge?
I would just add B in total. That's on page 107, what Councillor Cooper referred to.
Right.
You know, which is David Hill's recommendations.
Yeah. All right, 4B, that council initiates, or I guess, would we say council/local board initiates formal classification of Margan Reserve under the Reserve Act, etc. Yeah, okay.
Or
Does
would
that
we,
make
or would we have to say council
requests
the local board to da-da-da-da-da?
Through the chair, it might be better that it says recommend that the FO local board consider the classification of Margan Reserve under the Reserves Act 1977.
I don't think there's going to be any disagreement with that. We'll just, people are clear, we can resolve the wording, but it's simply along the lines on page 107 of 4B, but a slightly modified version to include the role of the local board in this because it is their decision. Okay, people are comfortable with that? I'll put those three recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. On that, so moving on, actually we might, councillors, because we're doing well time-wise for the moment, I'm going to recommend just a quick 5-minute break to grab a coffee, comfort stop, and come back a bit refreshed. We've got 2 more items to do and we're tracking well.
particular pillar for infrastructure are accessible, activity-friendly environments, fit for purpose facility, network of facilities, and facility partnerships. The prioritisation section, so the second one down there, from a council perspective, is around the sport investment plan that guides how Auckland Council will invest into sport over the next 20 years. This plan's still in draft form. You approved it for consultation in December, and it's been recently publicly consulted and will be coming back to you as a committee in a couple of months' time for approval. On the sports sector side, there's the Auckland Sports Sector Facilities Priorities Plan. This plan considers evidence behind each development and tests whether or not the project is ready to go and the right preliminary work is in place. So this is the voice of sport. This is sport having got itself organised to say, hey, look, these are the best projects coming from our sector, and it's advice through to us as council and other funders as well. At the investment level, there's the Sport and Recreation Investment Fund, which we're here to discuss today. And on the right-hand side, there's the sector side, which is external funding partners. So this is where we work with our network of funders to, I guess, leverage the investment that we put into projects and to get the best return for Aucklanders from sport facilities as value for money. As I mentioned earlier, the draft plan from our policy team targets a 20-year lifespan and is planned to be adopted this year. It targets investment into 3 key areas: low participant communities, emerging sports with high growth potential, and high participation sports. It's got 4 investment principles: equity, outcome focus, financial sustainability, and accountability. The recommendations we make today have been considered against these themes, and once the plan is confirmed, we'll be coming back to this committee with a robust criteria and process around this fund. The fund itself, there's $5 million available for investment in this financial year. It's followed by $7 million for the next couple of years, and then you'll see it jumps a little bit into the outer years of the LTP. So there's a bit of sort of incremental growth from those 5 years listed there. The fund will help achieve outcomes under the Sport and Recreation Strategic Action Plan, and like I said earlier, leverages investment to achieve that return. So in this year, it's the first year of this fund having been established. Our approach was to support strategically significant projects that maximise the community sport outcomes. They can be successfully delivered in a short period of time. So you'll note that a number of them have got existing funding streams already created. So they just need the last little push to get them across the line. Over 50 projects have been considered, and you should have that broader list sitting in front of you. And our assessment has been against the themes, the philosophy within that sport investment plan, as well as looking at the sports sector facility priorities plan and looking at the assessment criteria within that. Some of these projects have been through the first phase of the formal process there, but for the projects that haven't, we've considered their projects against those same criteria. I'll just add to the previous point that that approach had been workshopped with a subcommittee of councillors, and that councillor group approved that approach. So this leads us into the 8 recommendations that we have for funding this financial year. So the Waitemata Table Tennis Association, the project is to renew and expand the capability and capacity of their facility with $540,000 worth of investment. Three Kings Football Club, which is a clubhouse development to replace an old facility that they had at that site. So the investment is $992,000. Waitakere Regional Hockey Turf Trust, so that completes the final stage of this project, which is a hockey pavilion, which will mean that senior games can now be played there. So a $200,000 investment for that project. The Manukau Taniwha BMX, which is supporting infrastructure including a beginner track and a roof over the start gate, with $203,000 worth of investment. The Mahu Vision Community Trust, who are developing a multi-sport indoor court facility, so we're recommending $785,000 worth of investment for that project. Counties Manukau Off-Road Racing, finishing their track development, so $380,000 worth of investment. Papakura Netball Centre, so outdoor court renewal and rubberisation of the courts at Bruce Pullman Park, so $900,000 of investment for that project. And North Harbour Hockey, as part of a broader development that they're doing at that site, a new turf with $1 million of investment from this fund. So in terms of next steps, following, I guess, resolution from this committee, staff would put in place funding agreements with the recipients. These would be in place by the end of June, which would secure this year's investment towards these sporting outcomes. These funding agreements will have timelines for developments, community access imperatives, and reporting requirements within them. Our staff will also work with the recipients to ensure that they have the right advice as they move into the delivery of the projects. And following that, our council colleagues from policy will bring the final sport investment plan back to you for adoption middle of this year. From that point, we'll be able to seek your agreement on the final criteria for this fund and the contestable process that will subsequently run. This will be accompanied by our timelines for your approval. These criteria and processes will inform our future years of investment from this fund. Thank you.
Fantastic. Right, let's take questions and then we'll have any discussion. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair, and just to the team, thank you. Well done with the work, and I mean, we've got a bit more work to do, and that's the reason for this particular question. For those, and with the list that we have, how much work are we doing with them to ensure, and with funders as well, to ensure that they will be at least preparing themselves to be considered for the next ongoing years with the 10-year plan? So how much work are we doing with them? Because I see in the two early planning stages, there's really not that many from our particular local ward, but I know it's a regional fund. And so for me and my fellow councillors, it's a matter of getting to our local boards to have a look at projects that they have to at least get it ready. So how much work is your team doing to get these, all of them across the region, at a stage where they could be considered, please?
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. So our team is doing a substantial amount of work on a number of these projects. The projects are often led from the sport perspective, so they've been identified through code planning processes. So the individual sports codes and collectives of sports codes are prioritising their individual projects and then working with us on where their priorities lie. So our team respond to that and work with the projects to ensure that they're moving through that pipeline of development. And we're going to have a number of projects ready through time to be able to support and be able to grow participation through the supply facilities. You noted the fact that there's a number of projects that are, I guess, listed as being in that preliminary stages. That assessment was made based on the fact that we are coming to you with an interim measure for this first financial year, and that the robust criteria and process will still be coming into future years. So these were made on short-term projects that we could deliver quickly, and there'll be sort of the full process coming at a later stage. So we are working closely with the projects.
I think, Madam Chair, if I may, to just follow up and reinforce what Dave's saying to you, is that it is about building capability and capacity within the sporting sector to be ready to be able to participate in this process and unlock the investment from council and also other funders. So the pipeline that he's describing is building capability and capacity for the sector so they can develop the feasibility and get at the front end of the partnerships policy and investment plan, and then follow that through in a logical order. We have to queue these up in a pipeline, if you like, so that the investment that council's making is matched with other investors and the capacity of the sports sector just to deliver. So I think that has a very good understanding in the sector across the region.
Okay, good. I've got Councillor Clow, Councillor Stewart, Bartley, Walker. Councillor Clow. Casey.
Yeah, again, apologies for being late, but I just want to have a declaration of interest because I'm chairperson of a Class 4 gaming trust that supports a number of these applications. So I just want, it's a declaration, not a conflict. Of all of those up there, one stands out to me. It's a clubhouse development of Three Kings. Now I know I think it's the biggest football club in New Zealand, so I understand that. But all of the others are facilities and infrastructure for associations, et cetera, whereas that stands out as being an individual club. You just comment, because most other individual clubs have to basically build their own club rooms, or rebuild them, I should say.
Through the chair, you're right that it does stand out as being a clubhouse development. It, like you mentioned, it is a significant facility given the size of that club, with I think close to 2,500 members, and a significant portion of them being young participants. So this is seen as being enabling of participation, whilst it's not a core participation facility. It does really support that and provide that sort of social cohesion around sport participation that we all know is so important and a key outcome area of sport and recreation. Additionally, it's a project that has been around for a number of years, and it's seen that with this investment we can get it across the line and get a really good outcome for a community that's been waiting for a long time for this project.
Oh, look, I'm supportive. Now the other question is, Huapai indoor court facility. That's clearly signalled as it's an ollie. Is that being pushed aside because it's an ollie or whatever? Mr. Sayers might be interested in this. Is it being pushed aside? You know, because we had a meeting yesterday, and that's one of the ollies that why the hell isn't that happening? The courts club, squash club's got a couple of million that's ready to reinvest into it as well, and it just seems one of those ones where we do have willing other partners, but we can't wait too long or they're going to have to rebuild, and therefore that big chunk of money is gone. There's that one, and then what is not here, and maybe there's a reason for it, and I might have the wrong ward, but Kaipatiki is it, with the stand has been pulled down? Is that Birkenhead Memorial? I mean, again, what's happening there, and I think that's their ollie as well, but again, it's all pulled down or chained off or whatever, and where does that sit?
Through you, Madam Chair. So we are watching those ollie projects. My understanding is they're going through a number of them anyway, an indicative business case process. So we, from a sport and recreation standpoint, sort of maintaining visibility across them. We're awaiting the ollie process to roll on through, and then we'll look at opportunities to work with any partners involved in that. I see them as being outside the scope of this fund for at least for this financial year until we receive other advice.
But you are keeping an eye on.
We're certainly keeping an eye on those projects, amongst others as well.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
The steward.
Oh, thank you for that. I just wonder, how do you actually prioritise which ones actually go through? And with the ones that are too early for planning, I know some of them have actually been in planning for a long, long time, and some of them have actually probably also got other funding from other organisations that are just waiting for something to happen. So those are some questions. And are you going to make sure that you try to make sure that all the wards are looked after, and it's not just going to just one or two or those that have got the loudest voices? Yeah.
Through the chair. So we, in the assessment of these projects, we've used the, philosophy of the draft sport investment fund plan, to look at the projects through that lens. We've also used the criteria in the Auckland Sports Sector Facilities Priorities Plan to assess the projects. So that's, the initial lens that we've cast across these at the moment. In terms of the projects sitting in the planning stages, you're right. There's a number of them that have been in that area for a while. one of the hardest stages in the pipeline of development is actually those initial stages where feasibility studies and business cases, they're typically really hard to fund. There's not a lot of funders out there that'll actually contribute towards those particular areas. So we do see a bit of a bottleneck in that space. We're working with our partners to come up with a plan to how to alleviate that and have more projects coming through that pipeline. In regard to the geographic spread across the wards, look, that is something to be considered in terms of where Aucklanders are coming from in terms of their participation, and we see code plans from the sport as being a key way of identifying where the needs are for I guess, development in order to serve the needs of Aucklanders. In saying that, it's not a specific outcome that we're seeking in terms of individual wards. We're looking from that needs basis and to be able to respond based on those criteria that I mentioned earlier.
I'm just sort of thinking about just one that I sort of understand a little bit myself is like the Pakuranga Tennis Club are having to move because it's now on Maori land, so they're having to move, and they were going to be part of the Lord Ellesmere, the gymnastics, which is one of the biggest gymnastics in I think in the country, and I just wondered, because there's a few ticking points that there's clubs that might have to fold or stop for some time, because are all those sort of things getting put into some sort of a criteria?
Through the chair, absolutely. I guess the immediacy of outcome that's needed is something that is certainly considered through the prioritisation process, especially from that code perspective. So yes, that is wrapped up in the advice that we receive through from the sector about where the priorities for development are.
Just one other thing. Is there a reason why we haven't actually got sort of costings of what some of the proposed codes, how much it's costing? Is there any reason we haven't got those figures in front of us?
Through the chair, in the extended version of that spreadsheet, we do have indicative costings. The reason they're not in the version in front of you is because they're at different stages of planning. So some of the costings are more indicative from our experience across the network, and some are confirmed through quantity survey work. So thought it might be a little bit easy for misinterpretation if we presented those figures as being in a spreadsheet where they look like they're sort of cut and dried. So we can talk to you about specific projects if you would like to understand more about them probably after the meeting, if you like.
So the list that's currently here doesn't necessarily mean the order they're going to be prioritised to walk about. Thank you.
Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Thank you for the report. I wanted to question the assessment criteria and ask how wise is it to base assessment on a draft sport investment plan, not a final one? Also wanted to ask about how it's based on the facility priorities plan from 2017, which refers to 36 sports in the original 2009 Greater Auckland Regional Sport Facility Strategy, and seeing that is a 10-year-old strategy, whether it's outdated in order for these projects to be assessed against.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question. In regard to the assessment and basing it on a draft council investment plan, it is, I guess, the best guidance that we have at this stage. It has been passed this committee and been approved for consultation. Having been involved in a number of the consultation sessions, the support from the sports sector and from the wider community was generally really positive around that plan. So look, I think we are unlikely, pending the policy work to go into that, to see any significant changes to that plan when it comes for final approval from this committee. We wanted to be able to, I guess, express the council view that's been wrapped up in a significant process over a number of years developing that draft investment plan through the work that we're doing here. And given that it's not finalised, we used it as a piece of advice that was considered in the assessment of these projects. In regard to your question around the Auckland Sports Sector Facilities Priorities Plan that was finalised in 2017, that piece of work did involve a very large number of sports organisations. From memory, it was around 80 organisations were involved in the consultation around that plan. I do believe that it represents a good representation across the sports sector of organisations, in saying that through time I'm sure we will see new organisations come into existence, and we will be working with those organisations to make sure that we're feeding them into this process, we understand what their needs are, and we can work with them through time. And you'll note from the council document, the sport investment plan, that it recognises the importance of emerging sports with high growth potential. So that's a lens that we look at those sort of sports that may be newer to the table.
Bartley, that's actually the heart of the issue, so thank you for the really perceptive question. Councillor Walker.
Got a few questions. The first one I think was alluded to by Sharon Stewart. So what's the relationship between this list here and the process that we're dealing with in the agenda?
Through the chair, thanks for the question. The long list is a list of projects that our team within council are considering and working on, keeping a visibility across to track their movement through the development process to ensure that we have the pipeline of projects coming through. So I guess that was the wider list of projects that were considered in terms of the coming up with the recommendations for the projects.
So got a couple of specific questions, and one is just around the approach. So I'm looking, for example, at the Albany Tennis Centre redevelopment. I'm very well familiar with that centre, and I can see that we're saying too early planning stages. However, I note that in the commentary it states assets failing. So there are some specific assets in that building that need some attention now. Yes, you might put off something much bigger on the basis of planning stages, but it would be really great to have the release of some funding to fix up some stuff that is not necessarily expensive, has to be done anyway, rather than conceivably putting them off, because it's rather an embarrassment, and I'd suggest that some of the issues there go to health and safety. So I just put that to you. Is it possible to have a part release of some funds in instances where it needs to happen?
Through you, Madam Chair. Conceivably, that is something we could look at. That particular facility is there's work going on at the moment to look at options around that. So there's some consultant work being funded by that trust that oversees that facility to look at what the future is for it. That is, I guess, why we're saying too early planning stages for that particular one. I note your concerns around the health and safety at that facility, and we would need to see advice about the actual situation there, about whether or not that's a risk.
So just coming back to my question, is it possible to have a release of some very modest funds in instances where there's some urgency? Does that need to come back to us?
I think, Madam Chair, that's something we can report to you on future years of a responsive fund. We haven't received any application from Albany Tennis for that purpose right now, but we'll follow up and report back to Councillor Walker and perhaps Councillor Watson about what may be required there, and we can report back on a potential response.
I think that would
funding.
be a good
Okay, so that's
practical discussion.
It's the other question I've got just goes to a number of items where the project name is Colindale Park, and it notes, I won't go through all of them, but recommended funding in this round and so on. Are those items, or some of those items, part of the 8.9 million that we approved?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, the recommendations in this paper are for works to leased areas for community sport outcomes, so community leases. So the organisations are, I guess, working on their own asset at that site. The broader conversation around the landowner works at Colindale Park is a separate conversation to funding the individual organisations at the site.
Okay, the other question I've got just goes to our ability to assess a number of these projects, and I'll give you a couple of examples. A number of projects that fit within motorsport, and then there's at least one category here that fits under snow sport or ice sport or the like. I don't know how we categorise that. And we don't have CODA activity plans across a number of areas. We don't have an activity plan for motorsport across Auckland. I don't know that we've got anything for snow sport or ice sport or the like. So how do we go about prioritising those plans so that we've got an idea of investment and particularly opportunities for collaboration and so on, and getting things right?
Can I suggest, Councillor, I think that's a really good question, and we've raised around this table the need to have an urgent plan for motorsport on a regional level, but I think that's not for this discussion today, but I would very much like to wrap that into the wider sports sector discussion when it comes back to us next month after.
Through you, Madam Chair.
I think it's an important discussion to have.
The reason that I am raising it is that in the executive summary and in the report, there are other contextual items. For example, the Auckland Sports Sector Facilities Priorities Plan, the Draft Sport Investment Plan, and I'm in total agreement with those. What I'm identifying and suggesting is that there are other contextual items that could inform this, and it would be useful to have them in the commentary so that the councillors and the wider public, particularly the sporting public, looking at this, have that overall context.
Totally agreeing with you, Councillor, and I think the subset of code plans we can certainly have available to us when our wider sports sector plan comes back to us.
And the other plan that's useful is, of course, the venue development strategy, which goes to high performance sport and other things. So I just toss that in as well.
Yep. No, cool, completely agree. Councillor Casey.
I've got 3 comments. One's good, one's bad, and one's ugly. So I'll do the good one first. Delighted, absolutely delighted to see that at last Three Kings United have got their new clubhouse, changing rooms and public toilets. And for as long as I've been on even the Auckland City Council, that's been coming, I think, since the very early, like for the last, 18 years at least. To answer Councillor Cole's question, the clubhouse will be available and has been available to local schools. It's an activity centre for the whole park, and the public toilets will just be fantastic for the locals to have something new. So that is absolutely amazing. It's one of the biggest football clubs. I say football, I mean soccer. Football clubs in New Zealand. And they've got 2,400 members, and like 1,900 of them are under 18. So it's a real community hub. It's also in the most diverse area of Auckland. And football is a great leveller. Look at our World Cup soccer that we had at the International Cultural Festival. Fantastic facility. So great news. The bad news. The bad news is there's another football club in Albert Eden Ward, which is just under that line there. And I know that the local board are really disappointed it hasn't made the cut this time. And that's Metro. Can you say anything about the timeline around that? Must be very close to getting funding, because again, I think everybody expected it would be funded, and the disappointment is such that it would be nice to be able to tell them that it's coming up in the next round.
Through you, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, I don't have the detail on that particular project sitting in front of me. That might be something we can come back to you following the meeting.
I'd very much like to just get a handle on when we could expect that work to take place. I'm assuming it will be in the next year.
In terms of those future year allocations, we are still to come back to you with the criteria and process around the decision making for that before we can make any provide any advice about the following year's investment. So that's a decision that's still to come.
I understand that there's only 4 projects that have just missed the line. There's 4 of them that says funding shortfall too great at this time, just 4, and that's one of those. So I'm assuming it's kind of nearly there, right? Nearly there. And ugly. I was reading in the paper about the Avondale Bowling Club, and I see that you've got a line item that says Auckland Bowls is leveraging sale of some sites, and I wondered if you could just elucidate on the process for sale, and that we don't own it. We do own some of the bowling clubs. Could you talk about the Avondale Bowling Club just for like 2 minutes so that everybody knows what happened there? It's in court at the moment.
Through you, Madam Chair, without being having the detail in front of me on Avondale Bowling Club, my understanding is that facility was privately owned by the club. And there was a sale of part of that asset.
I guess just to be fair for the staff, and I should have, when we started the item, just to keep a little bit of control over this, it's the top bit is what we're here to talk about. Our staff are not, they don't have the information in front of them, and the long list is there for our interest, but not at the moment our discussion. So I just ask councillors to perhaps go to the staff directly with extra information that you need. And just in defence of the process, we said this was as good as it was as good as it can be for the moment. In the next couple of months, we will actually have the whole watertight process with all of the criteria, the contestability, everything else attached to it for our discussion. But at the moment, we need to get the funding across the line because we will run out of financial year time. So, let's get as close to perfect as we can. I've got Councillor Newman, Fletcher, Sayers and Cooper. Councillor Newman. Okay, should we just whip our way through the questions? Councillor Fletcher?
Well, thank you, officers. One of the challenges of amalgamation was always going to be looking at the funding and the equity around these. So I understand the work and the targeted approach and the investment guidelines that you've put forward, and I thank the Chair for this work that has been undertaken. To a degree, Councillor Casey has taken a comment that I had, but I want to bring it back to a question following Councillor Clow. Can you confirm that there has been 7 years of work that has been put into this application by Three Kings, and that there is some nearly 2.5 million that will be made available through partnership funding on this project? My understanding is that Foundation North Lotteries, New Zealand Community Trust, Milestone Foundation and the Four Winds Foundation have committed.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that's correct. There has been, a long process that this particular development's been through, and council staff have been working with them for a number of years. And you're correct that there is very substantive partnership funding that is coming into this project that the council funding is, supporting and leveraged against.
Thank you. And can you further confirm that the pavilion and clubhouse facilities will serve all park users, community groups and the local schools?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, there will be a community access agreement that we have as part of our funding agreement that we'll be putting in place that will secure the use of that facility for other community groups alongside the club itself.
And lastly, can you confirm that the project is ready to go, the engineering work, the consenting issues and all of those? So this is really the very last stage. This will see the council allowing completion of this project.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. This will allow the project to proceed into delivery.
Thank you for the disciplined way in which you've gone about the assessment of this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just I want to acknowledge and congratulate you on whittling down the list from 70 down to the number that you've approved. You know, that's a big effort and well done, and I congratulate you on that. So I've just got, look, two quick questions. First one's around the next round. So just confirming it'll go and it'll be more contestable, and the local boards will have input into that process, and perhaps local board services. That's probably the primary essence of my question, because I'm thinking of things like, you know, every council will have similar things in their regions. Like we've got the Mahu Sports Collective up there at the AMP showgrounds, which you're probably familiar with. So they'll probably the local board may well want to get behind that group in terms of lobbying and supporting those applications. So that's just question number one. And question number two, and I thank Councillor Clove for raising about the Ollies, Councillor, and because it's probably of interest to all councillors in terms of moving forward as well, in terms of their ability to enter that contestable process for Ollie projects. I'm not quite sure if they're in or out next time round. Thank you.
Through the chair, firstly in regard to your second question actually, around the Ollie process, so that'll be part, the next phase of this is developing the criteria and process, so I probably can't speak to whether or not Ollies will be in scope or out of scope of this project. However, there will be a process that we'll be going through to come back to you for advice around what that criteria and process will be for future years. In regard to that process as well, you speak about the local board engagement. With a contestable process, I would suggest that there would be real value in local boards supporting applications into the fund for projects that are happening within their local area. So there should be the opportunity for that local board voice to come through in terms of those contestable projects.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you to the staff for good work, and I do want to acknowledge the staff for the challenge around the governance and development of the master plan at Bruce Pullman Park, and say to you, Chair, that I'll have to meet with the trustees again shortly. There are some really difficult and quite intractable issues around the roles and responsibilities of different people and agencies in relation to Bruce Pullman Park, and this funding today is really, really helpful, but hand in hand with that will be a need to settle ultimately who is responsible for renewals of sports facilities. And so I want to thank Sharon and Mace in particular, but I do look forward to them coming with me as we continue that discussion, because it will be needed. Because ultimately, Chair, I think that the project to complete rubberisation is probably more in the vicinity of $3 million, and this is an amazing first step, but it is going to require a change in approach at Pullman Park to deliver an asset that is fit for purpose and which can be renewed, meeting the needs of the community, with the council playing an important role in that. So I want to thank the officers for their work and say that it's very, very helpful, and that we will need to continue the conversation with the trustees, who I think are in a better space now than they might have been, say, 18 months ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Mine was comments. I think the process has been really good, and we do only have $5 million this round, and I do have an interest as well as being a recommender to the Trust Community Foundation, but also then the opportunity to have been on the sport funders working group, and having that involvement of Sport New Zealand, Active, and people who understand what the code plans are all over the country, which all of the clubs, etc., the different sports and recreation adhere to. And so I think that's helped us to understand that we're not just doing this in the dark, we're actually helping follow strategies right across the region and the country, and so that we are doing the right thing. It's not random, and then we don't find out later, oh, we shouldn't have done that because it doesn't align. So I think that's been a really good process. And clearly, I mean, I think we've got to, based on the criteria of need and readiness, you've got some really good projects here. And one of the things is also being out in the community, you see these projects, and but for council, just getting us across the line, getting them across the line actually supports a lot of people in the community that do this involuntary. They don't often have the expertise unless they're very lucky that one of their members, you know, has some sort of expertise. And I think the rigour and professionalism that you've been able to bring to this process makes it really robust. And it does support that. I mean, I've seen some of these struggling for 10, 15 years, and they've actually just needed someone to pull it all together and give them that guidance, and then that last bit of money that we can help with does make a difference. And for all of these, they've all gone to get money from other places. So they've done the hard yards, and it's so distressing to see when communities do that work and then it falls over. So this will actually support the work they've done over the years, but also give it the rigour that we need in spending ratepayers' money. So I'm very, I want to thank you for that. I think also just the fact that it brings a real scrutiny to this, so we can be confident that when we vote for this money, it's going to happen, and it's going to be, people are going to be held accountable, and I think that's really important for the public to understand. But otherwise, I think it's been a good process. The other thing, I really appreciate this chart here. So for all of us across the region, we can see often projects that might be in our ward, and we can understand where it's at. And I think that's important, because often you go, I wonder what happened to that. But now I've marked it up, you know, I can see, and then I can, you know, I know that it's on the list somewhere. And when people come to me in the community, I can say, this is where it is, and what support do you need? So thank you very much for the work, and I really commend the project.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Watson.
Thanks. Just a couple of brief comments that kind of reflect what some of the other people have been saying. I guess the thing that stands out to me, you know, aside from the projects that we're giving approval today, which in many instances result in the council contributing up to a third to a half of the cost of the project, I would suggest that in the future, you know, the ability to get this other funding will be, you know, increasingly difficult. If we look at our projects as a whole, you know, we have 87 sports projects, 8 getting funded in this round, 16 are funded all round. On the face of it, $120 million over 10 years, you know, seems like a big sum, but obviously it's not, and it will go, you know, it will go very quickly. So there's a huge challenge for our officers here in meeting these demands that are going to only get harder. And as everyone's quoting from around their wards, there's projects here that have been, I would suggest, with all due respect, in the planning stage for a long while, and quite significant sums of money in some instances have been devoted by the entities to, you know, to get plans drawn up and all the rest of it. I mean, big sums of money. So, yeah, great. You know, these are the things that really provide benefits to our communities. That the only point I would make is that we know it's a constrained funding environment. We know $120 million won't come anywhere near to catering for, you know, the lion's share of these, and we know that new ones are going to come into the fold over the period of a decade. So for me, that makes the allocation of funding overall related to sport all that much more valuable. Every penny should count, and any projects, particularly big projects that take out big chunks of money and that run the risk of continual overrun or blowout, as the term's used, that we've seen quite a bit, they should be really held up in scrutiny in comparison to these ones. For me, these are the ones that matter, that bring benefit to all our community. So I hope over the budget round that we all remember this, as I'm sure we will, and put the same slide rule over the big stuff that we do, that the officers do so thoroughly for the community-based projects. Thank you.
So thank you. My comment is to thank staff for the work that they do. From my perspective, my ward isn't part of the funding round here, but it was before. So I'm going to give you a huge round of applause from an organisation that has been funded before, the scrutiny that went around that. And it was a long, slow, detailed scrutiny, which can be frustrating from politically, but I have very much confidence in what you as a team are doing as a result of that. So I want to thank you very much. The other comment I want to say is, and I know it's regional and you try and put the lens over, but 16 out of the 21 local boards have got a project out of this fund too, and that's I know that they're all benefit from a regional perspective, but that is a really good message too that we're giving, that you are trying to spread the love when there's conflicts around that, especially when we come into the second stage of the process in the cycle that we're in. So I do congratulate you on that. I also, Madam Chair, and I don't know where my Chair of Finance has gone, but I do take on Councillor Watson's issue around funding. And I think this is grassroots council business. This is stuff that makes, the health of our people out there in the community, makes a difference to those people. So I suppose the only concerning thing is how long the list is. And I'm certainly going to be very conscious of that coming, probably more LTP time, but certainly in the first instance around annual plan. So congratulations and thank you. And let's see if we can find this fund some more money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have to say some of us lobbied pretty hard for the 120 mil to go into the LTP, and the Mayor put it in his proposal. For those of you who will be around the table next year for the LTP, it's in your hands to spend money in this area and make sure that it gets in. Councillor Filipaina.
Chair, you've taken exactly what I wanted to say. Also, Chair, look, I just wanted to pick up on a few things that Councillor Watson said, and that was about the third and half of what the council funding for some of these projects. And I agree with Councillor Watson in regards to now having the ability to do that, to get these projects over the line for our community. And I mean, there was a question asked earlier around our community and how much access we are going to have with them. Well, we are going to have access to these facilities, and that's as a result of the 120 million in the long-term plan. So, Mace, to you, to your team, Dave, Sharon, to the whole lot of you, thank you so much. And I'm just going to echo again the comments that have been made for you. For the councillors that have been around this table since 2010, and in 2011 especially, seeing this and the work that this committee does, is I think is a very good example, because it's going out to our community saying that here are the projects that we are going to assist to get them over the line for our community. Here is the criteria. I looked forward to the criteria of the next allocation of monies. But, I mentioned before that it's important that any of the projects that are beneficial to our community and the accountability of that monies need to be put out. This is going to be put out. Chair, we've put out the targeted rate for the water, the targeted rate for the environment. So we're pushing those out, saying to our ratepayers, this is where your money's going. So congratulations for this. And my last comment is Mason and Dave, especially around the question I asked around the assistance that your team will be giving those that need to get over the line. I think that's important. That is so, so important. I mean, Councillor Casey mentioned her one in her ward. You know, I mean, but it is important getting them over the line, whether it be with the business case and any assistance with that, whether it's talking to our funders and getting them to support, especially if there is a commitment from council to put some funding into this particular project and allows them to get that funding. Look, that's just going to be beneficial for our community. So, look, congratulations and thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Another question, and that's around development contributions. I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that we've got provision here that's around improvements to park space and so on. And my understanding is that improvements to parks and reserves can be included in development contributions. Correct me if I'm wrong there. If that is the case, and we've got quite obviously substantial investment in areas where we've got big increases in population, I could go into that. Have we got these projects in our project lists that inform our development contributions funding?
Madam Chair, so there is coordination. There is coordination across community facilities and how we're achieving that. I think this afternoon's workshop, Councillor Walker, you'll be able to see the opportunities and challenges for development contributions and providing for parks.
So is that a yes?
That's a yes, Councillor Walker.
Okay, all good.
So that's a good advertisement for this afternoon's workshop, which we will bring forward. I think we're bringing it forward because this meeting will finish a bit earlier than we thought, so starting immediately after lunch. I just wish, alongside Councillor Cooper and Councillor Clow, I also have an interest, being a licensing trust member and recommending funding for various sports bodies in the Auckland region. It's not a conflict. I just need to note the interest and to echo the congratulations for this good work to the staff. So thank you very much. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And talking of good work, we move on to item number 11, which is now coming back for the 700th time. No, I'm just joking. It just feels a little bit like it. Our wonderful staff who've been working through the complexities around our funding for the Citizens Advice Bureaus in the Auckland region. And I want to acknowledge, I think we have with us ACAB, representatives from ACAB. Thank you for coming, and thank you again for the work. I think many of us understand that this is not always easy, so we appreciate your, we just appreciate you, full stop. Thank you. So can I hand over to the team?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everybody. My name's Christine Olsen. I'm the manager of the Community Empowerment Unit. And with me today, I have Trudy Farver, who's been working on this funding model for the last 2 years, and Kylie Hill from the Community Empowerment Unit. I'd also like to specifically introduce you to the members from the ACAB board. We have Peter Taylor, who is the chair of the board, and Les Wills and Ralph Martin, who are also board members. So I have a very brief presentation, and then we can answer questions. So just want to remind you of the background of this work. It started back in 2016 when the Regional Strategy and Policy Committee at the time asked us to do a review of services and funding with a specific request to look to achieve greater equity and fairness, taking into consideration social issues in local communities. So we did that piece of work and we came up with a model that we felt addressed that as well as we could, and we brought that back to this committee a year ago, and at that committee we were asked to go away and do further work on the model jointly with ACAB, and that's what we're here today to bring back to you. So the report today seeks approval for the proposed new model, and it also asks the committee to refer an increase to the baseline grant of $200,000 per annum for the next 2 years for consideration by the Finance and Performance Committee. So the 3 models that we've considered and that we've provided as options are the current funding model, which is 100% population based and doesn't include the populations of Franklin or Great Barrier. The second model is the one that we brought to you a year ago, which was 70% population, 25% client usage and 5% deprivation. And it did include the population of Franklin, but not Great Barrier. And the model that we're recommending to you today is the one that we've developed jointly with the ACAB board, and it's 90% population and 10% deprivation, with including the population of Franklin. We have consulted with local boards, and 17 of the local boards support the new model, with 3 boards, Māngere, Otahuhu, Manurewa and Otara Papatoe, preferring that the deprivation component is 20% rather than 10%, and the Franklin local board specifically wanting it noted that they support the inclusion of the Franklin population in the funding model. Rodney and Upper Harbour didn't support the model, and Waiheke had no preference for the model but supported retaining the 200,000. So the 200,000 was given to ACAB this financial year as a one-off. ACAB also consulted with their local CAB bureau, and the feedback that they got from the bureau was that they support the retaining of the 200,000, and they support the next piece of work, which will look at assessing service gaps and future planning. They raised concerns about using deprivation in the model, and the added expectations from council of the increase in funding. There were some concerns about the capacity of Bureau to develop new services, and particularly from the Rural Bureau, there was a concern that a population-based funding model doesn't take into account the complexity of their situation. We have worked one of the things that we have applied in the development of this model is the Auckland plan, particularly focus area 6 of belonging and participation, which has a focus on focusing investment to address disparities and serve communities of greatest need. So that's been one of our guiding things. The next piece of work, once we have got approval for this funding model, is to do what we're calling a network service provision framework. So that will be over the next 18 months. We'll work with ACAB, looking in a lot more detail at how the service will grow and adapt in the future, and how and where services will be delivered and in what way, that kind of thing. So that's really the crucial piece of work. We need the funding model sorted so that we can pay the grant to ACAB for the next 2 years in order to get on and do that piece of work. And that's the end of my presentation. I'll take the report as read, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so I'll just take questions. Councillor Walker.
Entirely supportive of the funding. 2 questions. First off, around this model that is the 90 population, 10% deprivation, noting that many of the local boards have made comments around that in terms of other things like immigration and growth and all sorts of things that I would suggest are relevant. Would it be fair to say that deprivation at this point is a proxy, that conceivably we could come up with something better, but it's, I guess, the easiest thing to go for at this point? Would that be a fair comment?
Through you, Madam Chair. The original instruction to us was to look at equity and fairness, and also taking the Auckland plan focus. There is that does guide us to look to need, and there are a number of components to need, and when we do the next piece of work, we will look in a lot more detail at all of those. Some of that, I think a big piece of the work will be looking at what fairly sits in the central government sphere versus local government. So some of the things like immigration and that kind of thing.
So this next piece of work could generate some refinement, right? Fine. And then the other question I've got goes to a point that you're raising, and that is, would it be fair to say that the government and government agencies and departments are a significant, say, beneficiary of the Citizens Advice Bureau?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, definitely.
Yes is all I'm after. And further to that, Madam Chair, and I don't propose to speak now, but I would foreshadow an amendment, partly by way of a small substitution and then an addition that the officers have. Thank you.
A second. Let's just deal with this sensibly, because I think the issue, yep, we'll get to it when we've had questions. So, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Newman, just questions at this stage.
Thank you. I was going to move, but that's fine. I think what we have just heard is the closest to Solomon that I have heard for a very, very long time. Can you confirm that this is really just a transit point in a journey?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, absolutely.
Can you confirm that the consultation you've done with ACAB and others, they understand that and they are supportive of where we are at the moment?
Yes.
And can you further confirm that the 200,000 we sought to put into the budget this time last year is in the baseline?
That's what we're asking.
Yep. So if the recommendations proceed, that it's in the baseline.
Yeah.
And lastly, that there will be no Citizens Advice Bureau that is worse off in terms of their funding from last time.
Yeah, that's correct. Based on the retaining the 200,000, that's correct.
So it was on that basis I was happy to move it. But I'd just like to, I don't need to speak later on, but I'd just like to thank them. This has been a very long process for a smallish amount of money in the scheme of council's budgets, but will achieve so much. So thank you very much.
Great questions of clarification. Thank you, Councillor. Very useful. Councillor Newman.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. I mean, look, I'm a fan of deprivation funding. Does your understanding of deprivation funding include recognition that with deprivation comes the likelihood of disengagement with services available? And if there is deprivation and disengagement from the services available in the bureaus, that actually there probably is latent demand for services, but it's not fully realised, and therefore it can't be fully quantified just using a determinant such as client usage. Can you comment on that?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, that's correct. I mean, there's a number of factors that that make it harder for deprived communities or communities of need to access services. Some of it is you know, as simple as transport and disengagement, as you say, language. There's all sorts of things. But so yes, the latent demand is a big issue.
Chair, I don't need to speak later on. Obviously, I'm a big winner out of this model, so I want to thank everyone in anticipation.
Questions? If not, any comments? Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to speak also as a JP, because a high percentage of the work done in CABs is the JP sitting in the office, not relating to any of the people there using the space. In my experience of why deprivation is important, I've sat in the Massey CAB, and also that it's important because I know the Rodney don't support this, but I have had many people from Rodney come to the Massey CAB to get JP work done. Many. Because I take their addresses because I have to record the work that I do. And so there's a bit of a mixed thing there that actually some of these hubs do support some of our rural communities because that's the service town they go to. And also they come across from Greenhithe as well because it's actually a bit closer and a bit more convenient for that. Now, in terms of deprivation, I think it's a good measure because in that same role, I sit at West City. We have a service desk. We're going much more out into the community now. Between me and one other JP, you can see over 50 people in a 2-hour period. And some of those things take quite a long time. So we are just constantly. And what I see in that community is a high number of immigrants, a high number of people who don't have as much education or wealth. They come to JPs and people like that because they can't afford to go to a lawyer to have all that sort of stuff done. Whereas when I go to the Northwest more, which is a different catchment, it is often Upper Harbour, it is Upper Harbour as well as it's just on the border of Upper Harbour and Henderson Massey. It's a lot slower, different clientele quite often. And so the need isn't so great when you have a more affluent community, which comes from Rodney, places like Kumeu, with the lifestyle blocks, etc. We know the demographics around Kumeu and Huapai, and West Harbour, Hobsonville, Whenuapai, quite different. And so you can see in a place where you have high deprivation, you get a lot more people coming to you. So I'm talking about JP stuff, but that's a lot of the work or the contacts that the CABs have, and it's great that they host that. They do it at a different time of the day. These service desks are in the night time when people who are working can come. But that's why I really support the deprivation, because I've seen it in practice. I've seen it playing out. The people that need the most help are often those people that are less well off and less connected. So I do support that model. I think it's really worthwhile. But you will also see that people from other areas will still access those sites, especially in places where you get an intersect of different local board areas which are quite different from each other. So I support this work. I wouldn't worry too much. I think it's I know that a couple of, or one or two CABs think they're not getting a fair due, but, you know, you've got to look at the numbers, you've got to look at actually the types of people that need the help that can't get it anywhere else. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank
Can't
you,
afford to
Councillor
get it
Cooper.
anywhere else.
Okay, I've got Councillor Watson, Sayers, Councillor Casey, and I'll just, when Councillor Walker's back, we'll just have a chat about whatever amendment Councillor Walker was proposing. Councillor Watson.
I'm just a little curious then about when Councillor Walker's amendment's going up, because I might well want to talk to it, obviously. So, you know, it would be normal process for that to be up now, wouldn't it?
That's fine. Just I was just going to ask Councillor Walker when he came back if he wanted to speak to that.
Yes, please.
Okay. Why don't we ask Councillor Walker to do that right now?
Okay, so two things there. One is the substitution of the word interim, and essentially that is reflecting what the officers have told us, that this model is going to be refined. I think that's important because we need to signal that, and I know that that would meet with the support of local boards, and I wouldn't doubt the Citizens Advice Bureau. So that's a pretty simple amendment. And then D goes to the question I asked that the officers answered in the affirmative, and that is that the government is a significant beneficiary of citizens' advice bureaus.
Sure is.
So I'll just read it. Approved staff completing analysis of the services that Citizens Advice Bureau provide that support and or substitute central government responsibilities. Now, I'm happy for that to be added to or amended, but what I'm mindful of is if we're going to get better funding from government for Citizens Advice Bureau, and that might mean less funding on our part, we need to have the work done. So this is just directing the officers to do that, and I know that they're entirely supportive of that, I think.
Perhaps D could just be added anyway. I just need to clarify the interim model versus the model that we might be adopting as the basis on which to negotiate the future funding agreements with ACAB.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the model that we're proposing is for the next 2 years, and once we've done the network service provision, we would be coming back with a new proposal.
I think, so what Councillor Walker and Watson have done is clarify. I would suggest, if you're comfortable, Councillor Filipaina and Councillor Cooper, that we simply add D to the recommendations we've got and we add an interim. I think we're all saying the same thing, we've just got some more words.
Noting, Madam Chair, for me is the issue around a huge percentage of the actual activities in CRBs is JPs, which is not related to that.
Exactly.
And a huge amount of the immigration stuff there is sponsor forms, all of those, and we get questions about all of that as well. And I think that that's where, and I know there has been a little bit of money, but it's about training of JPs in a whole separate kind of work plan through the government and the Ministry of Justice.
Great. You're comfortable with that, Councillor Filipaina?
Comfortable, and I don't know, because even though I got UE English, I'm really confused of D. If we put a comma after provide, wouldn't it make it easier from my perspective, because they do the analysis that provide, and then therefore the analysis is going to give us everything that the COBs do to support and or substitute central government responsibilities. I just wanted to make it clear. Totally agree about adding it, Councillor Walker. I just wanted to make sure that it's clear.
I took English, but I'm happy with
Yeah.
We're in danger of a major agreement breaking out amongst all of us.
Because I passed university.
Everyone's agreeing. That's wonderful. So I've got Councillor Watson, Sayers, Casey, and then Councillor Filipaina will close the debate. Councillor Watson. Councillor Collins. We'll pop Councillor Collins in before Councillor Filipaina. And Councillor Bartley. Okay. We'll rearrange it here, but Councillor Watson, your turn.
Okay, thanks. And I'm glad we clarified the matter of UE English. But depends if it was accredited or SAT, because it was a lot harder sitting than it was to get it accredited, I can tell you that. I'm glad that that recommendation has been added, because the last thing I would want to come out of this is a sense of some of the affected CABs sort of feeling undervalued, and I know the officers have made a real effort to try and ensure no one's funding goes down, and that there is some sort of recognition of deprivation. Though interestingly enough, in their feedback, the CAB themselves, very idealistically, I think said that that they considered that there's a principle there of treating all people equally, and I think that's a very meritorious principle to adhere to. I'm certainly not for the slightest going to challenge the notion of deprivation, because we only have to go around parts of Auckland to see what the effects of that are, and how large numbers of our society, more so than now, start way behind the 8 ball. However, and this is why I'm glad D's been added, that does not capture the complexity of the CAB services, particularly those in high growth, high immigration areas like big chunks of the North Shore, where, and it's referenced in the report, where there's a complexity of interaction. You only have to get involved with some of these work or immigration-related issues, and they are incredibly time-consuming and difficult to deal with. Now, the masses of new immigrant populations are centring around big chunks of the North Shore, in both the North Shore ward and also in the Albany ward. So I really take my hat off to our CABs who have kind of laboured there heroically to deal with this tidal wave of interactions with these new people or clients, as they called here. And you only have to look at the statistics, both the online statistics and the walk-in off the street. And often what we find, particularly in Asian community, is that the word gets round that, this is where you should be going to, and you're not just dealing with one people, but you're dealing with a succession of people from the same family or from the same ethnic group. So I think it's really important then that this ongoing analysis that takes, in particular, the huge challenges of the North Shore CABs, just trying to keep their head above water, dealing with this specific type of clientele too. And I would add, when it comes to deprivation, the South and the West do not have the monopoly on deprivation, because we have any number of poor people in our communities that are as deprived as anyone in Auckland. So we suffer certainly in terms of youth centre facilities, in terms of central government support, because there's this misapprehension that places like the sunny Hibiscus Coast and the bays don't have any social problems. You've got a beach, so everyone must be happy and life sorted. That is not the case at all. There's real pockets of poverty and need that are the equal of anywhere. And if you wanted to, I could show you around there. So our CABs are dealing with that as well as this new immigrant tidal wave. So I'll leave it at that. I just want, and I'm sure our officers do, to make it very clear that in the divvy up of the money that no one is worse off, but in my view, some of the CABs are not yet recognised for what the complexity of what they're confronting, and I hope that will be adjusted, because what I don't want to see is penny wise, pound foolish, where we lose the goodwill of these people who give up their time, and the service that they're doing, that the growing service, is somehow undercut by the relative crumbs off the table in terms of the council budget that they're asking for. So thank you.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I obviously have to consider the feedback that I've received from my own local board, the Rodney local board, and give that fair and due consideration. And I do want to congratulate the officers on the good work that you've done. I know it's been a lot of work and a lot of coercing of a number of parties, so well done there. However, I find myself in disagreement with my own local board, and I will therefore be supporting the recommendation. I also look forward to the continuing strong working relationship that's already been established with the council officers with CABX as well, and that's good to see. I also do support the amendment that's been put up there as well, so I'll also be voting in favour of that. And I also would like to reinforce Councillor Watson's point there about deprivation. And when I think of Rodney, immediately I would be thinking of the Helensville and Norwest areas in particular that really have deprivation and rely on their CAB to an enormous extent. Finally, I just would again like to acknowledge the positive attitude of the councillors, the council staff, the CAB and the CABX, and look forward to your next stage in this process, and I look forward to your reporting back to us in the future. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Casey.
Won't take long. Auckland's the first port of call for most of the migrants and refugees that come into New Zealand, and CAB has long been at the forefront of the first line, really, in servicing the needs of those migrants and refugees. And today, really, in supporting this funding decision, we're acknowledging that it's something that will be unanimously supported here, and we just thank you and the volunteers for the work you do, but more importantly, also recognise there was some frustration through this funding process. That's over now, so the word interim, you know, forget that. We support you and we always will. End of story. Full stop.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say thank you to the staff, and I forgot to ask the question, so I've made it a statement in presenting a comment. But I remember I asked the question at the workshop around the monies that were being spent by the Māngere o Tahu local board, and that's all been included. So I think it's a real win for them that it's now part of the entire package for CAB. So thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this work. I just wanted to say that it's really good that we do this and that we support the volunteers at the CAB. My experience has been that they go over and above to support their clients. I used to work for a government department, and that government department did fund CAB at a national level to provide consumer information. But it would be fair to say that a lot of government departments maybe overload and rely heavily on the Citizens Advice Bureau, which isn't commensurate with financial assistance. And also I wanted to pick up that for some CABs, they are very proactive in trying to reach out to different communities in what they provide. So just wanting to acknowledge, for instance, with CAB GI, they've got the food bank, CAB Onehunga, they're very proactive in terms of homelessness in the community. So I do also acknowledge that more needs to be done by CABs, and it's not unreasonable for us to ask that they reach out more into those sectors where deprivation is very predominant. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I speak in support of the recommendations, but if you will allow me, I want to actually really speak in support of the staff, because they made a special time in their diary to see a number of councillors who had questions. Those questions were asked and answered one-on-one, and then they were followed up in writing. And that level of support to a councillor is really important. It's a great, in my opinion, a great display of professionalism from that team. So that's my comment. I do support the recommendations. They've come as a result of listening, consultation with the organisation, and I think that's really important as well. So for me, Madam Chair, it's a process that has got us to this point, and I think staff need a bit of a round of applause on that. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And finally, Councillor Filipaina, who will close the debate.
Thank you, Chair. Support the comments about our staff, so congratulations. Also want to acknowledge your leadership in regards to this, Chair, right through this whole process, because it got a bit hairy in some of the other committee meetings. So your leadership in that is commended. So thank you so much for your leadership. I just wanted to sort of mention two things. One is the opportunity in regards to deprivation, is having a discussion. Later on, Councillor Walker asked the questions that I was going to ask around the conversation that we need to have at some stage based on, albeit 3 local boards around deprivation. So I look forward to that conversation with the funding or the budget right through to 2021, because it's only interim, as the people around the table have indicated. But I look forward to the conversation. Also, around the 200,000, I mean, obviously support because the more that we do support our COBs, the better for our community again. It's a shame that the Māngere Otahuhu local board won't get the money they've already spent supporting the Otahuhu CAB, but it is what it is. And but I look forward to the fact that it's 12%, I think, in the report around the base funding for them. So thank you so much, and Chair, thank you. That's the last few words.
Kia ora, thank you. And just finally, before we put this, thank you staff, thank you to ACAB. This is one that was never going to have universal agreement, but I think it's a real victory for kind and thoughtful process, and that goes a long way. So I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Well done. Thank you so much. Yeah, it kind of feels like that, doesn't it? Phew. And our last item, and I just want to make a quick comment. Item 12 is our summary of environment and community information updates, memos, etc. And we've got in here the letter from our Waiheke local board and concerning 5G and the worry that the Waiheke local board have expressed. On your behalf, I did write to our Minister Farfoy, and I apologise for the slightly casual nature of the letter. It was one of those that happened rather quickly, and it should have gone in a slightly more formal way, but it's addressed to Dear Chris. I will cover that off with him, and I'm sure he'll forgive me. But we are going to, on behalf of the Waiheke board and on behalf of the council, go to the government and say, can you just clarify for us what the issues are, what the safety issues are, and how you're setting the settings for 5G, because this isn't a council role. So I hope that that meets with your agreement. I've spent time with the chair of the Waiheke local board. She's very pleased with the action we've taken, and that covers it off. So I'm happy to move that we receive the summary of... Oh, sorry, here I wasn't looking. Councillor Casey, Councillor Cooper.
Just to alert councillors to the Have Your Say events across Auckland over the next 6 weeks on the needs of older citizens of Auckland. There will be one in your area. The 8 events are listed in the Have Your Say page. And so make sure you get along. They're all on a Monday or Friday, so no excuses. There's a couple on a Saturday. So it'll be a great chance for you to get to know the older participants in your ward and hear what their needs are firsthand. Look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. We are the older participants, some of us. No, I know. It's been a long week. Councillor Cooper.
Just one of the memorandums on that. I couldn't understand, all the titles were in gobbledygook. But anyway, on page 14. My question is on around page 99, the stormwater discharge consent, the global consent. It said that we were just awaiting to see if there are any appeals by the 10th of May. Do we have any appeals against our stormwater consent for the region, discharge consent? No one knows. 99, yeah, page 99. It's, yeah.
With all of these, we'll just need to go directly to the staff member involved.
It must be page 99 of the addendum that we got, not the...
Okay, can we just go directly to the staff member and then we can circulate
Okay, would that be... Oh, that would be Craig McElroy.
Yep. Okay, sorry about that. I didn't mean to rush past you two councillors.
No problem.
Thank you. So we'll move in second. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. And just before you go, Councillor Sayers, can we just take a moment, Councillor Sayers and Councillor Walker, because we've got Dean Campton with us. Dean, haere mai. On behalf of us, we don't have a great big presentation because I think there will be opportunities to do that. But just on behalf of this committee, I just want to acknowledge the fact that Dean will be leaving us. Koro will be taking over until the end of the term. But I just want to, from a personal perspective as the chair, Dean, thank you. I know you came to us from the private sector, from the outside, and you uncovered the slightly interesting challenging and often weird world of local government, and you adapted incredibly well to that. We did, however, I have to say, councillors, pass the occasional note to each other, as sometimes our meetings did get challenging at times, as it does seem that the Environment and Community Committee is the committee to which everything that is difficult and divisive and challenging and of great interest to the community gets referred. So Dean, thank you for putting up with the challenges that have come your way, for helping steer us through some very tricky issues, and for being consistently upbeat and positive and helpful. And I think on behalf of the committee, we want to acknowledge you, to wish you every good wish back out there in the real world. I will be having a coffee with you and you can tell me what the real world is like post-October. No, it is so not the real world. We however, do our best to make the real world part of our lives and to make ourselves more understandable to the real world. So thank you for making that, and best of luck and love and aroha to you as you go forward. So thank you. Do you wish to add?
Yes, push talk. The last time to push talk. I thought you might ask, so I made a couple of reflections, because I remember coming into this chamber 5.5 years ago, and it put the frighteners into me, to be quite honest with you. I didn't understand what was going on, let alone meeting processes. But having gone down that journey for the last 5.5 years, I've loved every minute in this organisation and the things that I've been involved in, the debates, the issues. It is a real world, so I do understand what you say. It's a real world, but a different world. They're both real in their wonderful ways. But I see the debates, the policy issues, the discussions, the agreements, the disagreements, and I think that's where we refine the New Zealand that we want to become, and the Auckland that we will become. So I've really, really enjoyed it, and I thank you for your support, and I hope I've been able to contribute along the way. So thank you very much.
Yeah. There's 8 points down there, Dean. What about the other 7?
Madam Chair, before we close, I forgot is for Renata Blair and possibly James Brown. They have one for a tangi.
We've got them, and thank you. No, thank you for remembering, Councillor Cooper. That's really appreciated. We'll declare the meeting closed, and we said we're aiming to have everyone on the runway by 12:30.